Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the second PxP conference, a conference for and by patients, all about patient engagement and research. My name is Rebecca Esparza, and I'm a proud member of the International Steering Committee that has completely designed and developed all aspects of our conference. If you'd like to take a look at our committee members, we're going to drop a link with our bios in the chat. I do have a land acknowledgement to share. I'm joining today from Corpus Christi, Texas, which is also the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Karankawa Indians, who began settling along the Texas Gulf Coast around the 16th century. We acknowledge that we are being joined today by people from across the globe on land that has been stewarded by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. PxP is an international virtual conference, and some of our attendees may not be familiar with this practice. We encourage you to spend some time learning about and reflecting on what a land acknowledgement means. Please take the time to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat if you'd like to do so. A word about words. We realize in some places different words are used. Patient, patient partner, patient research partner, consumer, patient and public member, patient engagement, consumer involvement, patient and public involvement. But no, we're all here to globally talk about how people with different types of lived and living experience are working with researchers as partners in research. A few housekeeping notes. Today, we'll have 3 sessions tackling the challenging topics about patient engagement in research. We will have 30-minute breaks between the first 3 sessions and a 15-minute break before our last session, a new session for this year called Ask Me Anything. Our first session, exploring some of the ethics of patient partnership and research. Second session, navigating difficult experiences when patient engagement doesn't quite go as hoped. Third session is about bringing new voices to research and building diversity. And the last session, an Ask Me Anything about patient engagement in research. Please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask questions of the speakers. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. Also, please use the chat function to share a bit about yourself. Share any resources you'd like people to know about, that type of thing. We're going to be capturing all thoughts and resources shared in the Zoom chat in anonymized summaries for each session. We will also post a link to a Zoom guide, so look out for that Zoom guide in the chat. Closed captioning is available to viewers who join the session through Zoom, and you can turn this on by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your screen as a viewer. You can then select the language you would like these captions to appear in. And we won't spend too much time introducing speakers. We'll ask you to look at the conference website to read more, and we'll post the link in the chat. We would like to acknowledge Mary Bocage, who had agreed to be part of this year's steering committee and who passed on earlier this year. We would also like to acknowledge all patient partners who move in and out of the patient engagement and research space, whether they are still with us or not. Our social media hashtag is #PxP24. Feel free to share anything you wish on social media about the conference, about the sessions, and please know that we're recording all our sessions, and they'll be posted on the PxP website after the conference, so everyone can watch who wasn't able to join us live, or if you simply want to rewatch. While the conference has been designed for and by patient partners, of course, we welcome others who have joined us today. We also want to let you know that we took your feedback from PxP23 into consideration. We've done our best to diversify the steering committee members and all of our conference speakers, as well as take into account some of the topics you said you wanted to learn more about. We will do the same with any feedback you provide us this year. This conference and community are all about you. We want to take this time to thank our conference's supporter, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research's Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis. We're going to post a link to that in the chat. And before we get started, I want to launch a quick poll to see who is joining us today. So if you could take a couple of seconds to let us know who's here and what kind of perspective brings you to the PxP conference today. Answers are still coming in. Thank you guys for taking the vote. We'd like to see if there, if there's caregivers out there, researchers, patient partners. Almost done. We're still getting some responses coming in. All right, looks like we have 55% patient partners. We have a good amount of caregivers. Welcome to all the caregivers that are out there. A great amount of researchers, 40%, students and trainees, clinicians, patient engagement professionals, and folks in the industry, and also just folks that are interested in learning more about patient engagement. Welcome to everyone. We're so happy that you are here. So our first session of today is about exploring some of the ethics of patient partnership in research. And now I'd like to hand things over to Simone Eastman-Uwan, who will moderate this session. Simone?
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Yes, hi everyone. As you've heard, my name is Simone Eastman-Uwan. I am a medical doctor with sickle cell disorder, have done a bit of research, and I'm really glad to be here. Please don't forget, as we go along this discussion, to put your questions in the question and answer function of Zoom, and we'll try to get to them as we go through the session. So first, I'd like to ask everyone to just introduce themselves really quickly. I know you guys have the write-up, so but just for the sake of doing it, in case you haven't gotten to that yet. So Jim, would you like to start?
Good afternoon, everybody from the United Kingdom. My name is Jim Elliott. I'm a patient partner with about 25 years or so experience, lived experience as a cancer carer for close family members. And for the last 15 years or so, I've been working as a patient partner with lots of different people in the UK. Alongside that, I've also worked part-time for the Health Research Authority in the United Kingdom, which is the organisation that runs research ethics committees. And that's until this last year, that is. And that's sort of where some of the background to my participation in this session comes from. So my kind of joint role, and I've also been doing some work as part of a team developing some good ethical approaches to patient partnerships.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Isabel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Simone. I'm not going to get into too much detail because, as you said, it's on the bio pages. I would like to acknowledge that I'm logging on from the traditional unceded, and to be clear, unceded means stolen, lands of the Squamish people, which is in the west coast of Canada. I'd rather just give a bit of a positionality statement. I'm a caregiver of 2 disabled kids, well, young adults. I'm disabled myself. I've been in this area of patient partnership for about 16 years, I think. And I also recognize that although I'm a woman and disabled, that I have a lot of privilege in this work, and as a patient, that should inform in a good way how I work with others, recognizing that.
That's awesome. Thank you. And thank you for the land acknowledgement as well. Okay, so Jim, we're going to start with you. So if you could, for the sake of context, tell us a little bit of, or share with us the difference between research ethics and then patient engagement in research, the ethics of patient engagement in research.
Okay, thanks, Simone, and I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. Before talking about the difference between those, I just want to go really back to basics and mention ethics, because I think everybody who's tuned into this will have some familiarity with the word ethics and its use, and probably be aware there's some confusion sometimes between what different types of ethics applies to. Basically, ethics is about how we as people, we as human beings, behave towards each other. And so there are many different types of ethics, or ethical domains as they're referred to in academia, and they refer to all the different aspects of human life in societies. So you really need to specify what sort of ethics you're talking about, and usually that relates to particular relationships. So for this session, there are two types of ethics that are relevant, and you've mentioned those already, Simone. So research ethics, most people, I'm sure, participating in this conference have heard of, maybe fairly familiar with. And then there's the specific ethics of patient partnerships, which is not the same thing, but the two are related. So I'm going to just very briefly say a bit about research ethics and what it's about, and the fact that it's not about the ethics of patient partnerships, and then how the two, we'll go into how the two relate to each other as we go through the session. So research ethics is about ensuring that the people who take part in studies into human health are treated ethically, respecting their safety, their rights, their dignity, and their well-being. It came out of the abuses during the Second World War and was first enshrined in the Nuremberg Code of Practice, and then in the World Medical Association's Declaration of Helsinki. So all studies into human health across the world, across the globe, in which human participants take part, they used to be called subjects, that's a rather dehumanizing term which is being dropped from the Declaration of Helsinki, they must be assessed, looked at by an independent research ethics committee, sometimes called a institutional review board in academic institutions, and there's different terms in different countries. And the focus of that is on the participants and whether the people who are going to be taking part are having their safety, their rights, dignity, and well-being respected. The focus isn't on the role of patient partners in that per se, but there may be some consideration of the fact that patient partners are involved. And that will come about in the part of that review, of that assessment, when a research ethics committee will look at the research team and their knowledge, skills, and experience to do the research, including any patient partners that are involved. But that doesn't have a focus on that interaction between the patient partners and the researchers. So that doesn't have, the ethics of patient partnerships doesn't have an overarching framework like the Declaration of Helsinki. It's down to the professionalism of the research, the professional researchers, and the patient partners themselves, in a sense, to sort it out for themselves. And so there isn't that universal approach, although there are a number of groups across the world, and I'm part of one of them in the UK, that have been doing some work to try to come up with either frameworks or guides which will help research teams and patient partners who get involved with those research teams sort out some of the potential ethical issues that may occur when we as patient partners work with professional researchers. So that's the kind of difference between the two. They're related, but they're not the same thing. And it's not the role of a research ethics committee, or it shouldn't be the role of a research ethics committee under the Declaration of Helsinki to look in detail at ethical issues between research partners, patient partners, and researchers. So that's the kind of, I could talk on about this for hours, but I'm not going to. I think that's probably plenty for now. And then if there are questions, we can pick them up through the chat as we go through the session. So back to you then, Simone.
Sure. So I'm thinking, based on all that you've said, what does the ethics of patient engagement, because you did say there's no structure, there's no official structure. So what does the ethics of patient engagement mean to you personally? And then I'll ask as well the same question.
Okay, I was hoping you could ask Isabel first, but I'm happy to go first. So for me, and it's very similar to research ethics, it's about mutual respect, in this case, between professional researchers and patient partners. So it's being respectful of the role that each has in the research process and acting accordingly. So it all comes down to mutual respect, as far as I'm concerned, which is one of the sort of key behavioral aspects underlies ethics, all types of different ethics. So it's in that context, it's legitimizing and properly recognizing the role that we have as patient partners and the role that professional researchers have, and that they're mutually beneficial. So that's the heart of it for me, and everything I feel comes out of that. I'll hand over to Isabel.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Before I address what ethics means to me, something that I've been thinking about lately when it comes to kind of the definition of ethics, or what kind of ethics are relevant to patient partner, or what can get conflated. Something that I think about as well is often we're working with clinician researchers as well, which is different from working with researchers who are not clinicians. And that can bring forward a whole other set of things to think about. I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But when you put it so clearly like that, Jim, I thought, oh, wait, there's like one more relationship that can be, let's call it complicated. As far as what ethics and patient partnership means to me, I mean, Jim, you just nailed it on the head. It's really about respecting everyone's expertise, and then taking the steps to show that respect in concrete ways, whether that's lowering barriers, creating safety, integrating feedback or our own expertise into a project. One way I often think about this is it's not about you, or at least it's not just about you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can just add one more thing though as well, and I really like what you said, Isabel. Is another aspect of this is manifests itself in something which is referred to as the golden rule of societies, and is often talked about on the positive side of do as you would be done by, do things to others that you'd like done to yourself. But actually, from an ethical perspective, it's better flipped on its head, and it's don't do to somebody else anything that you wouldn't like done to you. So within the context of the role of a research patient partner in a research study, a researcher needs to think about how they would like to be treated, and vice versa. The patient partners need to think about, okay, I've got my skill set and the researchers have got their skill sets, and I don't know something they don't know, so I need to think carefully about how I frame things. So that's the mutuality, the mutual respect coming through. But I really like that use of it. It's not something I came across in doing research for the work I've been doing, and I like that flipping it on its head, of because I'm very familiar with do as you would be done by, but I like the don't do as you wouldn't be done by, as it were.
And then it also brings in that discussion, which always, I could talk a lot about, with the difference between using empathy and respect, where even if you can't empathize with somebody else's position or perspective or background, you don't need to. You just need to respect that it is real and needs to be taken as something real. So that whole don't do unto others is you don't actually know, so you have to ask.
That's fair. That's very fair. We are being joined by Vina. And hi, Vina. I just want to give you a chance to quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll pop the question to you as well, just kind of roll from where we are. So quickly introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Simone. Hi, everybody. My name is Vina Mohabir. I use the pronouns she and her. I'm a settler on Indigenous land in Takaranto, which is a Mohawk word meaning where there are trees standing in the water, which I always think is so beautiful when you think of the Toronto waterfront. In terms of my background, I have lived with a lot of medical complexity since I was a teenager and chronic pain as well. So I feel like, we definitely, a lot of us share this experience, unfortunately, but I couldn't ask for a better community. And I was engaged as a patient partner in research at a really young age. So I was actually 15. And I really didn't know the ropes or anything about engaging as a patient partner. And I was incredibly lucky to have mentorship from people like Isabel and Dawn that really helped me learn how to advocate for myself and how to trust my gut. So my big focus is in equity in patient engagement and really making sure voices that we don't normally hear are heard, especially for like nonverbal youth or youth that are equity deserving populations, such as Black and Brown youth, Indigenous youth. So that's my passion. I actually pivoted, fell in love with research, and now I'm doing my PhD at University of Toronto. It's in health systems research and looking at the intervention, specifically an anti-stigma intervention for youth living with chronic pain. So really, right up my alley and using that lived experience lens to inform everything I do and enriching everything I do. But again, there have been lots of situations where the ethical considerations haven't always been taken into place, and things like tokenism and, take place in the research community. And there is a movement towards more inclusive research, but what does that mean and how do we do it ethically to keep everybody safe and in a way that is trauma informed, especially because so many of us are interacting with the same systems that literally gave us so much trauma, hoping to make it better. But, we are daily interacting and re-traumatizing ourselves. So how do we keep ourselves safe with storytelling when we're sharing those stories? So that's a little bit about me. And I've already heard such great insights from Isabel and Jim. But yeah, that's a little quick summary about myself.
Thank you. That was comprehensive. So good to have you here. Glad to have you in the conversation, especially with your background. Isabel, so can you think of an example where I know Vina brought up research partnerships, and just an example of a partnership that went really well and just or that went really poorly? I think it's and what you did about it. I think it's important so that even the listeners know, how they would navigate something like that, or even what could come up just from listening to what you all have to say. So could you give us an example of something like that?
So if I could, I'd like to do very briefly one of each because they really
Sure.
show how things can go differently. And I'll start with something that went poorly so we can end on a high note.
Okay,
uh,
that sounds smart.
I talked before about that whole clinician patient issue. And, a lot of the work that I've done has been in the space of pediatrics because of my experiences as a caregiver. And when you're working in that research space, especially in rare disease or pediatric pain, it's a small community and you see a lot of the same people. And I was once in an opportunity where one of the researchers on the team was a clinician that our family had very troubling experiences with. Wasn't the PI, but just like on the bigger team. And, as long as we were, asynchronously emailing about stuff, that was fine because I could just delete everything from him because I literally, I can't with him. And when it came to like an in-person meeting or a conference, when we were there in person, I realized, and I didn't say anything to the PI because I felt a little kind of silly about it. I did later, and she was great, but I found that I couldn't be, the way I protected myself was by leaving the room. So when this person was presenting, I just had to walk away. And I think that's a recurring theme for me is know when to walk away before, during, after, know when there are people there that will really treat you with respect. And if you're not getting that vibe, it is not worth rehashing your trauma for something that isn't going to work. I mean, we rehash our traumas all the time, but in service to something. And to me, that makes all the difference. So that was things not going well, and how I dealt with it. My best example of things going well, there's a particular researcher that I work with quite often, and we were in a I was flying to Ottawa for a big launch event, and there was a video that was going to be part of the launch event. And a day and a half before the event, you know how this everything happens at the last minute, the video from the video people was sent out for notes, and right away I noticed there's no disabled representation in this. There's no disability representation. And I don't as often anymore, but I often would feel this kind of tension around having to be that person. And I said, hey, this isn't okay. And the researcher right away said, okay, we're going to get back to them and tell them it's not okay. And then the day before, I was literally at the airport on the way to the event, less than 24 hours, got the latest version, and the only disabled there's all these kids and cartoony, it was great. The only disabled kid was like so sad and really depressed looking. I was like, oh my God, this is worse. This is worse than not having representation. But it was less than 24 hours to go. And I very reluctantly, as I was waiting for my next flight, called the PI and said, listen, I have to say this. And unlike in a lot of situations where you get told, oh, the budget, it's already done, it's too late, she said, we'll fix it. And by the time it was launched, actually, by the time I got to my destination, it was fixed. She explained to the video, company what to do. And then there was representation that wasn't like, oh, holy cow, I'm so depressed because I'm disabled. And to me, that shows respect, that shows understanding that I had expertise others didn't have on the team, and the importance, and made me feel for future opportunities safe to be that dissenting voice, which is important because so often we are the dissenting voice. I mean, often we agree, but more often it's like, oh, hey, you forgot this thing. And if you don't feel safe doing that, then what is the point of even being there?
Right. Wow. No, that's awesome. I'm glad that it ended. You're right. Ended on a good note, and it feels like you're respected too. In the process, like your input counts, which is awesome.
So I work with a lot of psychologists, and they like feelings. And one of the things I think the language of patient partnership is like, does the patient partner feel respected? Do they feel safe? And I really want to push away from that and say, are they respected? Are they safe? Like, it needs to be an action, because it puts the onus on really creating that.
Yeah. How about you, Jim? Have you had a situation where things were particularly great, or most times we remember the ones that didn't go so great? But at the same time, they instruct us, right? They instruct us on how to handle it, what not to do, all of those things. So can you think of a time when it went not so great, and how you handled it?
Yeah, thank you. And I like the way, Isabel, you started with the things are not gone so well, and then an example that goes well. And I can do the same. I think it's very helpful in that respect. I've been very lucky for the most part that most of my involvement has been good, but some of the early ones weren't so great. And those were mostly where I was working with an organization that funds and manages research rather than a research team. And they were looking for a kind of higher level advice on how to involve other patient partners and how the organization will work overall. And one in particular, it set up a panel of people, and I think a couple of the others who might have been on that same panel with me are probably watching this. And from an ethical perspective, and picking up on some of the things that Isabel said, they weren't really clear enough at the start what the boundaries were. But we didn't, it was early days for us both. We don't really sure. And then we weren't sure as a team, as a team of patient partners, what was going on. We talked to each other, and without us, I think, really realizing it, I think the management team felt a bit uncomfortable that maybe we were talking behind their backs, but then they weren't being clear with us. And then there wasn't enough clarity. We weren't being respected properly. And the point that Isabel said, we didn't feel it, but also we weren't being respected properly. They weren't being properly honest with where the boundaries were and what we could decide on and what was happening with what our insights, what we said. So we didn't really know, in a sense, we didn't really know what was going on. We had a chat about it. We all met together on a regular basis. We had a chat about it after dinner one evening on one of the times we met up. But the next morning, the person responsible for it kind of tore us off a strip, basically, which was terrible, because they thought we were ganging up on their staff, which we weren't. And it resulted, there were 6 of us on this panel, it resulted in 2 of them just leaving. So doing what Isabel said, vote with your feet. I'm off. I'm not being respected here. And we all talked about it privately, and the other 4 of us decided to stick with it. And it was quite hard, and it was quite painful. It was pretty uncomfortable, but it did get better because it forced that conversation about, well, what is our role? How much of a partnership is this really? And what happens to what we say? Because we just had no idea. And I think there were mistakes made on both sides, but we learned a lot from that. And that has influenced a lot of my thinking since then. So fast forward to more recent examples. There's a couple of projects I'm involved with at the moment, and they've just been so good, the research teams, at having a really clear role description about what's required, what they will do with what we say, how the decisions will be made, what the level of partnership is. And it's not that you should expect an equal partnership always. If you get it, that's wonderful. And even if it goes beyond it and you're leading or co-leading something, but you just need to know where you stand. And the couple of projects I'm involved with at the moment, I know exactly where I stand, and I know exactly where the other patient partners stand, and they know where they stand. And it doesn't feel like there are any skeletons in any cupboards. The respect is genuinely there, and there is no tokenism there. And Vina mentioned the tokenism, the big T word. The early example, there was loads of tokenism. This feels like there's none with the 2 particular projects I'm thinking of at the moment. And I just feel very comfortable. I feel I'm respected because I know I am, and I really respect the researchers I'm working with. And that means that if anything does come up that's difficult, I'm very confident that the researchers will just say straight away, and that they will listen if I feel there's something coming up. So it's a real feeling of mutual respect.
That's awesome.
That's it for me.
You guys are really talking to your audience, because they have so many questions, and I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to pick some that seem to correlate with what you've said so far. So one says, in your patient partner's perspective, how should the meetings be conducted to ensure that you feel safe, respected, and comfortable sharing and being involved in the research discussion? Anyone can answer.
I think I'm comfortable chiming in, Simone. So I think so many amazing points have been raised so far. And I have been doing patient engagement for like since I was 15. So it's been 15 years now. And I think as somebody who did it in pediatrics, like as a child, an adolescent, engaging with health systems, and as a racialized person engaging with health systems, a racialized woman, my experiences of safety can sometimes be a little bit different than like traditional views of safety, especially because I feel like it's important to take into account who we are as people and what our lived experiences and all those intersectional factors that make us who we are. So sometimes there's the assumption that like we because of you're in the room, you grew up in a household that was mid SES. There was like kind of that assumption, and there's the assumption that in the Canadian context, and I think it applies to the American as well, but like you have health insurance, right? So when you're working on projects, it can sometimes feel shameful that you have to put up your hand and say, hey, I didn't have this experience. I didn't have health insurance, and that shaped my experiences with the healthcare system. And then especially as a racialized woman, I often feel, as Isabel said, we're dissenters. We're people that are challenging the status quo with our lived experience. And really all we have to stand on is that lived experience. And if people don't recognize that as valid expertise and respect that expertise, because I saw this quote online, but I've lived with this condition more time than you studied that in school. You maybe spent 5 hours learning about it max, if anything. I live with this, and I experience the social determinants of health at all these levels. So I think safety looks different depending on the factors of who you're engaging. So as a, again, racialized woman, I need a little bit more mutual trust and acknowledgement of the unique barriers I face. And sorry, a racialized disabled woman, thinking about my friends who are non-binary to spirit, they're experiencing their gender diversity informs a lot of their experience as well, right? So I think we all have layers to what informs our safety. And the best thing you can do as a researcher is start a conversation that's really honest and transparent. Get to know your patient partners as people, because we come with a lot of different expertise and a lot of, we come with a lot of trauma and baggage, but we also come with tons and tons of insight about utilizing the system. So I definitely think, if you're working with Indigenous folks, like there are different considerations to take into account and cultural considerations. So I don't know if like, a lot of times people say like, oh, transparency, mutual respect, those things definitely do apply. But I do think it's important to address the realities of the systems we are engaging with and how those systems continue to stigmatize us. And then finding safety with those researchers. And thinking about the examples that both of you gave about working with researchers, good and bad, I have examples of the same researcher that is good and bad. They often do things, they're human, right? So a lot of times, it's challenging their assumptions and their long held biases about what our lives are like. And, you could read the literature, but it's not actually a real representation of what our lived experiences. So a lot of different factors there, but, I think also condition specific as well. Sorry. So like, if you're working with, youth getting gender affirming surgeries, right? Like that is a different population, and safety looks different as well within those populations. So again, I'm going to pass it off to everyone else because I know there's some great insights here, but yeah, that's a little bit of what I think about safety.
I think that just for the sake of, I think the questions I'm seeing we're answering as we go. Maybe people asked them and then we answered them. But Isabel, this might be, it says, I don't know if this makes sense, but I find that ethics in the traditional research sense and behaving ethically in real life are two very different things. Do you have any thoughts on this, or am I the only one noticing this? Hold that, because I'm about to ask you a question. And you talk about pretend partnerships, and I think that this might answer some of that. So essentially, it seems like everything appears ethical, but there are things happening that aren't. So can you, Isabel, speak to this, the pretend partnership?
This is such a tricky situation because you could go into an opportunity where it looks like they're being transparent and what they want from you and what the project is, and they kind of talk a good game. The situation, and I'm just going to pull from examples that I've been in, was I was on a project that was creating a patient and family facing tool in pediatrics. And it was a subject, I stayed on longer than I should have because it was about pediatric pain. And we had such horrific experiences that it's one of those things that we do where it's like so important to us that we sometimes put ourselves in places that we know aren't going well. And of course, again, when you're in a system where the clinician researchers you're working with are in the same institution where you were, or importantly, are getting care, or your kids are, it's really tricky to be that dissenting voice. And again, the trauma of that can be really difficult. The situation that I was in is we were working on this tool. I had a lot to say about it. My kids actually contributed as well as unpaid patient partners because it was important to them too. Like they participated through me in terms of what would work and what wouldn't work. And time and again, what I said was important to include or to change or was traumatizing to put language a certain way, I was always vetoed. And we'd get back to the next meeting and it would be back to what it was. And what was happening was for reasons having to do with the context of the institution, the clinician, well, I don't know for sure who was vetoing me, but I kind of know. But it was basically from the clinician researcher side that they basically overwrote what my contributions were over and over and over again. Ultimately, again, that was a walk-away situation because there was no, I spoke to the person coordinating patient partnership. I said why this is problematic. Very uncomfortable conversations that I shouldn't have had to bring up myself. But nothing changed. And I kept hoping for the next time something would change. To the point that they were going to publish a tool that I would be co-author on that in no way I wanted associated with my name. In no way. Yeah, no, it was bad, but on the face of it, it looked like it should have been a good opportunity, which is one of the reasons I think it took me a while to kind of get the I'm out of here situation. And again, like my big thing is like, go with your gut. If it doesn't feel right, even if you're already into it, leave. If you have the capacity to have a conversation with somebody, try. But if that's not working over and over again, that's telling you something about how they value or don't value your expertise. And I say specifically expertise because the things that I commented on were things that nobody else on the team would have expertise on. It's just they decided their clinician researcher expertise was more important than mine. So to me, that's that pretend partnership. You go in there thinking and they gabba, 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 but then the end result, there's nothing of you in it.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's a lot. And it actually answers a ton of the questions in the question and answer. I'm not sure if you all are able to see it as well, but so thank you for covering a lot of the questions. Jim, this one is for you. What are red flags for you when you look at teams? And, let's say you're part of a team initiative, and what might tell you about the quality of the engagement you might expect?
Thank you for
In
that.
other words, how do you pick a good team?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I say any more on that, I think both what Vina and Isabel have said illustrate actually lots of red flags. I mean, some of those are things which happen later on, but I think if we think about an opportunity to get involved as a patient partner, some of the things that can give you an early indication that it's going to go well or it's not going to go well. The first one always for me, I think, is that almost the first thing you see once they said, hey, either you're applying for something because somebody said we want some patient partners, or somebody approaches you, is that you can see something that describes what you're going to do. We call it a role description. Others may call it something different, but something that actually sets out all the parameters that will pick up some of the issues that are coming, the questions, and that Vina and Isabel were talking about, whether you talk about them as safety or whether they are diversity issues. And interestingly, listening to both of you, it's interesting how people who are perhaps most marginalized, parts of society that are most marginalized, actually illustrate some of the ways to handle and not handle some of these issues of safety better than a white Caucasian like I am, where you can be treated fairly roughly because you're part of the mass. So the role description is absolutely critical. One interesting red flag when you meet people, and you've got to meet teams, that's really, really important. It's got to be personal. Maybe it has to be done over Zoom like we're doing here, but you've got to meet people. You've got to see their faces. You've got to see their expressions. You've got to be able to interact, because ethics and good behavior and good and mutual respect comes out of how we behave to each other. And you can't do it on, just by email or phone calls. You just can't get enough out of it. And so one of the interesting red flags for me is when you talk to a team and they tell you how wonderful they are at patient engagement, and you think, yeah, there's an inverse relationship there, because actually the people who are really self-aware never say that. And the people who say, we've been doing this for a while, but actually we know there's tons to learn and we're really looking forward to working with you and learning from you as well. You can begin to relax a little bit, because that people don't think they're brilliant. They know where their experience is, and they know what they know what they don't know, and they're perhaps beginning to be open to you telling them things they didn't know, which is where we really bring value. So when you get that openness and that honesty and humbleness from people who may have the brain the size of a planet and know they're cleverer than you, but does it really matter because they respect you for the insights you have, are open like that, then and you can tell when it's fake and you can tell when it's not. You've got to go with your gut, as both Isabel and Vina have said. So if you come across people who tell you how wonderful they are at patient engagement, I'd be very very cautious as you go forward.
Great feedback. And funny too. So this one is for Isabel. So Isabel, what do you as a patient feel like, as a patient partner, feel like you owe others? And what are your own ethical dilemmas about involvement? So, for example, of helping other patient partners or leaving teams so others can get a chance, that sort of thing.
So thank you, Simone. We all know that traditionally patient partnership looks like me, a white, middle-aged, financially stable woman who has a university background and can speak the language. I'm not going to say that was a fine place to start, because it wasn't, but that's how it started. And we know better now. We should know better now. If you don't know better now, then I'm not sure you should be doing this work. So I often think about, what do I owe people who are starting off doing this work in terms of mentoring, in terms of, when I started, I think this happens to all of us if we stay in it long enough, that you're in opportunities and you're so grateful for the opportunity that it can really put you in harm's way and you don't know what best practices are. So if the researcher isn't aware of them or the team lead, then you're kind of left adrift. So conferences like this, where we can kind of create a common language around what we should be expecting from projects, I hope reduce the chance that people are put in that position. Because if we all know to say, hey, that opportunity is not okay, then there's less of a chance that somebody new to this work is going to be in a bad state. I also think a lot about, again, with the privilege that I have, is my experience actually the most relevant, or is it the easiest for people to access? And, I think I'm pretty special, but that being said, I have a limited scope of my perspective. We all do. So if there's an opportunity that's would be better served, a project, I mean, you're serving the project better, or the research area better by having somebody with more barriers to care, to research, then it's my responsibility to step down. But again, you have to think about somebody new to the area. Is it a team that's going to be safe for them? And do you drop somebody into a team that isn't? So these are the kinds of things that I think about. And finally, around this is happening less now, but still happening. But when we first wrote our paper on patient compensation, so that was 4 of us patient partners that wrote it, patient partner compensation, there was a lot of pushback from other patient partners around, I'm a volunteer, I've always volunteered. Well, the folks that can say that generally don't have financial barriers, or if they have reasons like being on disability that they can't take compensation, it's not about you. If you don't make it possible for other folks to participate, if you're an easier patient partner to work with, then you're making it so that folks who should really be there aren't. And to me, it's very cut and dry to me that I should be making room for others in all my decisions. I mean, sometimes my experience is the one that's relevant there, but often there can be better. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that we just that importance of stepping back and making space for others and respecting it. There was the conversation around language at the beginning, respecting how other patient partners want to define themselves. It's not about you. It's just make space.
There's a great question here as we're talking. Well, there are many great questions, but something I'm interested in myself. So is there a recourse to the ethics board if the research team is not meeting the promises made in the ethics application? I mean, as we're talking about, ethics and so on, okay, so if this doesn't go as it's supposed to go, is there any recourse?
Because it has nothing to, I'll let you answer it, Jim. I'd be curious to hear what Vina has to say around that making space, because I feel like I'm speaking for others a little bit when I talk.
I'm so sorry, we're close to wrapping up, so I may only have a space for Jim to say real quick, and then we are probably heading towards wrapping up. I'm sorry, Vina, but go ahead, since she sent it to you.
Sure. It depends on what country you're in and how the research ethics committees are managed. But in the UK, they are taking much more notice of patient partners as part of the application. But it's actually outside their remit. If the researchers are not respecting the patient partners, then it's not part of the research ethics. It's not part of the research ethics domain, although, and it's too late after they've given a favourable opinion. And there is an issue, somebody's put it in the chat, who's advocating for us? And there is a problem. We have no union, we have no recourse. But one thing that in the UK is encouraged now is for researchers to take their patient partners with them to the research ethics committee meeting, because actually they're the people who can answer many of the questions the ethics committee has about how the participants are being protected, but it also shows them that a real partnership is taking place in the running of the research. It's a kind of thing that's developing, but it's technically speaking beyond the remit of a research ethics committee because it's not about participants. You know, it's like a dispute between researchers. It's not the research ethics committee's job to deal with it, but if it's really bad, then it means the whole team is dysfunctional. So if it got really, really bad, then potentially they could raise it with the authority, and they might do something to try to find out what's going on, but it's pushing it at the moment. So it's something that needs working on.
Wow. Okay. That's kind of a dismal. I mean, I'm glad there are places that are trying to do something, but it's amazing that we have these things in place, but yet there's no recourse if it doesn't, if it doesn't get addressed or doesn't get worked on. So Vina, we still have a minute, so I'm going to give it to you. One piece of advice. One thing that people should remember just about this conversation, everything that we've talked about.
Thank you so much, Simone. I think there are lots of amazing things to take away from this conversation. And the great thing is, working with all these amazing folks, I'm sure there will be knowledge translation some way, shape, or form about what we've spoken about and a summary of everything. But in my opinion, I think when you're thinking about the ethics of patient partnership, it's important to remember the power dynamic. I think that's something really important to take away. As it was mentioned, like we don't have advocacy a lot of times. We are not getting paid or compensated actually like what current economically we need to survive in this environment. And I think there is a lot about re-traumatization and about creating safe space and overall listening to yourself. A lot of times we think the problem is with us, and I challenge you to think the problem is maybe with them. The problem is maybe with white fragility. The problem is maybe with systemic, white supremacy, and ableism, So I think that sometimes it's really important to take a step back and realize like, you are not the issue in this in this environment. It really is the people that have a responsibility and have the as part of their careers, they need to learn how to engage the communities they work with safely. You're doing research, that it's very common in the disability community to say, nothing about us without us. And I think that is incredibly important to remember. There is nothing about us without us. You have to engage us, and how do we do so safely and ethically is a big question. But yeah, I think there's so many ways this conversation could go, but very important. I'm happy to continue, the conversations offline. I'm not on X as much, again, just thinking about equity, but you can reach me on a lot of other platforms. But yeah, those are my key takeaways, and I'd love to hear what Isabel and Jim's takeaways are too.
Well, unfortunately, it's 12:59, and I have to hand it over back to Rebecca. And there she is, right on time. Okay, all right. I suspected we didn't have any more time. Thank you all so much for this robust discussion, really. And Vina, I just wanted you to know so many people were having such positive responses to what you were saying. So I'm glad that you were able to shed light on a takeaway point. It's not you, it's them. Okay, need to fix the system. All right, back to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Simone. What a wonderful job you did on moderating that session. That was quite active and a great Q&A. And thank you so much to all the participants in the session. And thanks to our audience for their participation. The chat was just amazing. Just lots of thoughts and great feedback. So we're going to take a break for 30 minutes, come back for session 2 at that time. And thank you all, and just have a good 30-minute health break now.
Awesome.